Race of Contradiction. Written by Dawi1234. Read by Daniel Million. Humanity was considered dangerous, unpredictable, and chaotic even after they managed to achieve FDL travel and barely accepted as an observer race of the Galactic Union. A minor race divided by numerous nations, language, cultures, religions, and ideologies that seemed hell-bent on destroying each other for the most part of history. They waged bloody war that lasted more than 200 years by their time, because of tiny differences between two religions, and waged another 100 years of civil war in the same religion because of another more minuscule difference. They used to discriminate and hate their own people based on one's skin color. It was something so deeply ingrained in their minds that in some parts of their homeworld, it lasted amongst the people even after they achieved interstellar travel. They set their entire homeworld on flames of war twice. The first one directed by old kings full of greed. The second conducted by some madman who believed his tribe was far superior to any other. They invented the ways of destroying their planet into a barren wasteland, even before they managed to achieve space travel. In short, many of the Galactic Union, including myself, saw them as a squabbling, brutal, and idiotic race of tech barbarians that somehow escaped the fate of damnation by sheer luck. An annoying new neighbor at best, a dangerous threat for everyone at worst. For the most part, they seemed to be eager to prove that our predictions were accurate. Until the Scourge came. The Scourge was nothing like we ever encountered. A race of biomechanical horrors from another galaxy, destroying, consuming, and assimilating every single being that stood in their way. Even the stars were sucked dry to provide their gigantic bioships and incomprehensible weapons the power they needed. In the first cycle of war, they destroyed half of our fleet and drove the entire race of Iroh, an elder race, one of the founders that established the Galactic Union, to extinction. The once proud and noble Galactic Union fell into utter chaos after that. Some of us tried to flee or hide in the furthest corners of the galaxy. Some committed suicide from despair, shame, or fear of suffering fates worse than death by the hands of the Scourge. I didn't blame them. After witnessing what they did to prisoners, let's just say some things were better left in the dark, for the sake of sanity. Most of us just went catatonic from shock, not knowing what to do in the face of this sudden apocalypse. It was then that the human race finally showed its other side, something that we didn't notice or simply ignored until then. Their many nations suddenly stopped their ceaseless squabbling and acted as one under the banner of the United Nations, an event surprising not only for us, but also to them. As one of the human generals later told me, it was something that had never been seen after the Korean War. Their politicians, demagogues, and religious leaders setting aside their differences for once, and spoke of one singular message. Humanity will be victorious against this threat, no matter the odds. In the system of Sol, human factories located in the Mars asteroid belt and on the orbits of Jupiter began to fuel their engines of war by literally cracking planets open. Part of their asteroid belt and one of the many moons of Jupiter were melted down for resources. In the span of mere standard months, an armada twice the size of our former Union fleet was fully armed and started to strike back against the Scourge. And they didn't stop manufacturing after that, giving away their surplus ships, weapons, and supplies to us. Both their fleets and the supplies granted the Union precious time and resources to reorganize ourselves. In the forgotten undergrounds of their homeworld, humanity opened the vaults, an arsenal of forbidden weapons that were considered too horrific and dangerous even by their standards, and unleashed it upon the Scourge. Whenever the Scourge committed atrocities, human forces would return it tenfold. Nuclear weapons evaporating an entire fleet, genetically modified plagues that wreaked havoc amongst the Scourge ranks, chemical weapons burning and choking and sometimes melting the enemy in droves. But what was most shocking to me was not their capability of waging war, nor the sudden unification of an entire race. It was their nobility. I heard and watched records of countless human soldiers willingly throwing themselves into danger, or even sacrificing themselves to save one more life, whether it be their comrade or some unknown civilian, human or other species. Many of said humans were made into heroes during the war, Some of their feats almost impossible to believe. Apparently, one of their medics rescued hundreds of wounded during the reclamation of Karak, not even carrying a pistol, because his religion didn't allow the believers to use weapons. During the Battle of Alayan Nebula, which turned the tide of the war against the Scourge, some of our vanguard forces, including the Xandria's Light, commanded by myself, got surrounded and cut off from the main forces. The Scourge were preparing to board and capture us, probably to do horrific things and broadcast them live through the whole fleet as their classic shock and terror tactics. I thought we were a lost cause. Humans did not. Two of the human Dreadnought-class flagship, Rock's Admiral Yi and HMS Admiral Nelson, led the spearhead deep into the Scourge fleet. They literally tore through the bioships with their overwhelming firepower, sometimes using their sheer size to ram and crush the small ones. After they reached us, both of the dreadnoughts used their impressive bulk and meter-thick armor as a shield, protecting us and allowing the spearhead to jump out safely. It was after the battle that I heard their fate. Even the dreadnought's armor couldn't stand against the concentrated barrage of Scourge, and both of the ships couldn't make the FTL jump because of the sustained damage. Still, they never stopped fighting until the very end. Nelson, unable to move because of a damaged engine, destroyed nearly 100 of the bioships with its remaining guns, including 10 of its same size. After the ammo depleted, the ship's crew, defiant to the last, overloaded her fission core and took out huge swaths of Scourge fleet swarming for the kill. Admiral Yi, with his main gun destroyed and hull breached, somehow managed to ram through Scourge bioships until it reached the core of their fleet, a massive hive moon, commanding the Scourge forces. We weren't sure what happened after. Many of the witnesses report a blinding explosion of light behind the Scourge lines, and the sudden disorientation amongst the Scourge. We couldn't find any of Admiral Yi's nor the hive moon's remains, as if they were erased from the universe. Some speculate that it was a sort of FTL drive collision. I didn't care. It was their sacrifice that mattered most to me, to which I owe my life to this day. After that fateful battle, gone were the petty barbarians we view as the face of humanity. In their stead, we praise them as the people of ingenuity, strength, virtue, and heroism, savior to their allies and comrades, death incarnate to their enemies. What later came to be known as the Great Galactic War lasted for 3 standard cycles. Scourge fought to the last. They couldn't understand the concept of peace nor surrender. But after the huge loss they took in the Battle of Alayan Nebula, they were severely weakened and easily destroyed by the Union forces. We managed to triumph against a threat that was never seen after the creation of the Galactic Union, mainly thanks to humanity's huge and unexpected contribution. As I quote one of their politicians in the past, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." To the bewilderment of many of my colleagues, and pretty much the last of the galaxy, the said race immediately returned to their old habits once the rebuilding efforts were completed. Humanity once again divided into many factions and began to squabble with each other and other races in the galaxy, making a lot of noise and trouble wherever they went. It was as if the race of noble heroes that we witnessed in the war never existed in the first place. When I asked about this phenomenon to one of my human friends, he simply shrugged and said, "It's our nature." I couldn't understand his answer that day, much like others that were puzzled by humanity's behavior. But as I wrote this, I came to realize that humanity's greatest strengths only show itself in times of crisis, when a common goal or threat is needed to be dealt with. They are a race with contradictions in their nature, too chaotic and diverse to unite as a whole, but seemingly unstoppable once they agree that something needs to be done. A people with a surprisingly kind and noble heart, but also capable of destruction and cruelty. Part of Memoirs, written by Keithless of the Cericians, former Admiral of Union Fleet. A Race of Contradiction, written by Dawi1234, read by Daniel Million.